Hey, John Gilroy here. Well, here it is in January of 2025. Let's look at some predictions for the public sector. Let's talk about AI, cloud compliance, and let's not forget SBOMs. Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast. My name is John Gilroy, and I'll be the moderator. Our guest today is Joel Krooswyk, and he is the federal CTO of a company called GitLab. And what I've done is I've assigned him this task to give us exactly precise predictions for 2025 World Series, Super Bowl, snow predictions, fires in LA. Joel, we need everything. We need exactly what's going to happen in 2025. Can you handle that?
No challenge at all. Wow, is it good to be back?
Yeah, well, I always tease about crystal balls. I tell, hey, my crystal ball was broke when COVID, and awful hard to look what's going on, especially in so many changes in Washington, D.C. and the federal government. So I get some mountaintops here. And so the first image, maybe the mountaintop we take a look at here is maybe, in general, but cybersecurity. So this is the big mountaintop I was talking about now. And so 2025, gaze into your crystal ball here and tell us cybersecurity and in software. So what do you see is going on here?
It's interesting from the perspective of cyber being one of those things I expect to persist, right? This may be the most unexciting, I guess, from the prediction side of, yes, I expect our focus on cybersecurity to persist, and I expect that we're going to see more of the same. That's good and bad, of course. And my hope is that going forward, we see this focus not veer from where we've seen it for the last decade plus, where cyber continues to see the funding, it continues to see the focus, it continues to see the need for us to pay high attention to, because coming up, the thing that's changing is just the speed to threat. So from our perspective, we need to make sure that in the cyber world, we're keeping up faster than ever. And I think therein lies the real challenge as we look forward. And that's where things start to shift a little bit from a predictive perspective.
I'm a big intellectual, so I like your reference in general intellectual magazines. And so one of my references, Magid Magazine, and they used to have a guy named, what was it? It was Spy versus Spy, that was it. And Bad Magazine. I think that's what's going to happen here. It's going to be spy. Someone's going to post something, some other, but, bad, good, bad, one attack, defense, attack, attempt, but it's always going to be based on software, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And I think that's a great analogy, right? We've got more creative spy versus spy interactions. We've got faster interactions. Maybe the cartoons themselves are being drawn by AI. We've got a really different scenario shaping up here. And that speed to the cyber threat is really what I'm watching. So imagine the spy versus spy, but now we're watching it on double or triple speed. It gets real interesting real fast.
Well, let's talk software, because that's what GitLab is all about. So how do you think the federal agencies here are going to change their approaches to the software development cycle?
Let's start right with the AI thing, right? As long as we're on that topic, I think what's going to be most fascinating ahead is how today, if I want to use AI, I push the button. I say, hey, give me something. Here's my prompt. Give me something back. Tell me more about it. And each time I have to tell it. It's like when you use a search engine today. You punch in your information, you expect a response or a million responses back. Where we're going is AI standing out in front like a bouncer, like a bodyguard, like somebody who's out there in front saying, I'm watching. I'm watching on your behalf. Or when you engage it for one thing, it goes out and does all kinds of things for you in the realm of software development. And so what we're seeing is that it's no longer a push the button to see things happen type environment. What we're seeing is you push the button once and a whole string of things happen. And from a cybersecurity perspective, in the background, AI is watching for those changes. Oh, I see an emergent threat. Let me fix that for you. I'll let you know when it's ready. You can approve it or verify my work. That's a dramatic shift. And that's moving from the reactive world or the narrow AI focus that we have into a more proactive or agentic AI for the new year. I think that's probably the biggest shift that I'm watching.
The last time we spoke, we talked about software bill of materials. And that was maybe 6 months ago, I think. and that time it was a best practice. But I think it's a shift to being, well, no, it's more a requirement than a best practice, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who missed that, software SBOM, software bill of materials, right, is what that stands for. And this is something that's been fascinating because we've watched it become mandatory in the Internet of Things, especially as it relates to things in the medical device arena, right? So the FDA said, hey, we really want to see some SBOMs if you're going to give us a device that's going to be involved in that part of the world. That part is starting to expand out though, because the Department of Defense, we saw this with the Army. They said, if you're a vendor or a consultant or a contractor and you want to give us software, we'd like to see the SBOM on that. In fact, you're going to have to give it to us if you want to do business with us. I really believe this is a year we see that continue to expand out. There is a whole lot of interest in it. And despite the fact that I hear, wow, these are really difficult. It's true. They can be really difficult to generate appropriately. There's still a best practice baseline that we can hit, and people are aware of that. So, case in point, if I go to grab Adobe's Log4j today, Log4j is almost that, ooh, what happened there, right? That was a scary moment in time. It comes with an SBOM, right? That's where we're headed. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the year ahead for sure. The question is, who's going to actually mandate it alongside the Army? I think we'll see several of those hit this year.
Yeah. Well, in Washington, D.C., I meet with people in coffee shops all the time, next appointments next week. And in a Washington, D.C. coffee shop, you can hear the word compliance a whole lot. I mean, maybe not in Chicago, maybe not in L.A., but a climbs the street and come up. So let's talk about DevSecOps and compliance. So big maybe collision in 2025, or how's that all going to play out?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, just for the record, French roast, real dark. I don't put anything in it. That's the way I like my coffee. So next time we do get together, that's my order. From that perspective of compliance, I think this is where things are starting to really get interesting. For the longest time, we talked about GRC, that was over here, and then DSO or DevSecOps over here, right? We started throwing the acronyms out all over the place. This is the collision point where GRC, DSO all comes together. What's happening is that whole idea. I mean, John, think back. When you maybe were in school and that PE instructor was standing there with a clipboard,
Mm.
checking the box if you could climb the rope, checking the box if you could run that lap, checking the box if you could, fill in the blank, but making sure you were doing the things. Well, unfortunately, that continues to be the case for how a lot of us do business today, right? Agencies are checking the boxes of compliance to this day, and it feels like a virtual clipboard, really. And so we're getting away from that. We're seeing real-time compliance become a thing. And that comes to light through things like security policies, role-based permissions, things that we can do virtually that now give us protections. I liken it to bowling. You can't bowl the gutter ball. The bumpers are in place to keep that ball on the lane now. And we're going to check your score automatically. You don't have to write it down anymore. So those kind of things are what's happening in the compliance space. And what that means is compliance becomes a part of the automation that we've applied to software development. More and more, if the test is running, if the security scans are running, compliance is looking real time and saying, oh, that license, that doesn't work. Hey, you pulled that open source from the wrong repository. Don't get that one. We don't want that one. And it's staying one step ahead versus us looking at it later and saying, ooh, we missed something. And those times are far more expensive in the world of compliance than where we're headed today.
So does the word commoditize? Where is that what we're talking at right now?
We'll get there. Yeah, I would say right now that's not the case, but as more and more functions are automated, you're going to see some commoditization in the world of compliance. I firmly believe that.
Earlier, I mentioned Mad Magazine from, I don't know, 50 years ago, but I want to go back just 15 years. This guy named Vivek Kundra, I had him on my radio show, and he wagged his finger and he said, "Cloud now and gold cloud first," and everything else. And that's been kind of a theme for the last 15 years in federal software development. And so, more or less cloud usage. A scary phrase is repatriation. Where do you see what's going on here?
I feel like 2025 is a year of crazy divergence. So for 15 years, yeah, we've been going to the cloud and we're going to continue to, right? There was just recently a really large contract signed again with AWS. I saw it come across my desk yesterday. I said, wow, look at the size of that. We are seeing more and more usage of the cloud. But at the same time, due to cloud costs kind of spiraling out of control in some environments, or based on how the applications were or were not refactored to use the cloud properly, the word repatriation has entered my vocabulary over the last 8 months or so as we're starting to see people say, you know what, I'm going to pull that one back. That one makes more sense for us to run in-house. That one, I can't afford a third-party risk happening in that environment, or it's just too expensive to run it there. I've got the capacity here. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm seeing this crazy split where we're still using the cloud more. We're still trying to get out of managing all our own stuff, while at the same time saying, I have to have an eye on the budget because it's just gotten so expensive. And it's one thing for us to tackle it with developers and say, hey, you can only do this. It's another thing to try to reinforce that. And so I think that's where some of the controls are starting to come into play.
When I talk to people from large consulting organizations, and we know the usual suspects, they always talk about use case for this, use case for that, and everything else. Well, I was at CEO.gov, and I noticed that they came up with a list of something like 1,700 AI use cases for the federal government. Whoa, really? And they're trying to. It's like someone, hey, let's go swimming in that lake in Wisconsin. It might be a little too cold. Well, it could be cold up in Wisconsin. Jump in, Joel. Here's I could jump off the pier. I could take a boat. I could wade in. I could jump off the fishing boat. So it seems like they're looking at it, and as far as AI goes, they're thinking about it, and they have to worry about software development. This big jump in, don't they?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, as a guy who lives in the Chicago area and we moved to a lake in 2021, you
Yeah.
can't get in that water. It is rock solid. So get your ice skates out if you want to get on it today. That said, I think from the use case perspective, it's fascinating to me how many already exist, right? A lot of us are looking at generative AI like, wow, is this crazy new? It's only a couple years old. And that's not really true. We've been using AI in the federal government space for a decade pretty effectively. We're just seeing an efficiency uptick. We're seeing more opportunity for commercial availability of this, right? So those use cases that we have today, a lot of them are really good, but what's going to happen after this is kind of an explosion of those use cases. And so things like when we talk about applying AI to software development, it feels like an obvious solution. It's one of those kind of easy, oh yeah, that makes sense kind of things. We're not as worried about AI hallucination because, it's writing code. How far are we going to hallucinate? You're not going to make up something in writing code in most cases. That's pretty rare. When you look at other use cases, though, now it's going to be case by case of, okay, as AI improves, what can we do with it next? And so those use cases are really fascinating. This last week, I was at the Edge 25 conference. It was a fantastic event. Learned a ton about some of these use cases and whether it applies to space, whether it applies to border patrol, whether it applies to something that we're doing with at the IRS today with AI. There's so many use cases that are really, really valid. And without those use cases, it would be almost impossible for us to keep up with just the volume of things that happen in this country. So I'm excited by what we have. That 1,700 number, I expect to double over the next year easily based on the push for more innovation that we're starting to see.
So we know we have these use cases, and so Joel's going to sit back and get a piece of paper and a calculator and figure this out and go, well, will this really drive efficiency gains, or will this just be more razzle dazzle to talk about at your golf course or something? I mean, there's fun AI, razzle dazzle, the shiny object, but then there's efficiency. So do you see really efficiency coming out of this?
I do, and I think what we're going to look for most of all is if you take AI and efficiency, there's a third term that has to go with it, and it's ROI, right? What did I get back for my investment in AI? So from a vendor perspective, from GitLab's perspective, for instance, what we really like to look at is, okay, you're using our AI solution to help you write software. What happened? Was it good? Was it not good? And we are providing things like a dashboard that says, for teams using AI, here's kind of what you did. Here's your progress. Team's not using AI. Here's what it looked like for you. And we're not saying here's how much better one is than the other. It's literally just saying, hey, here's the stats. You determine whether this is good for your environment. In general, if we talk to people who are just starting to apply AI, we might see somebody say, you know what, it's been 8 weeks, 12 weeks of use, maybe a little more than that. And maybe it's a 25% improvement or 50% improvement. I don't know about you. If I could put my money in the bank and make 25 or 50% as a return on investment, I'd take that all day long. I recently saw that from Salesforce. They were talking about this, like a 30% improvement in productivity. These are huge numbers. The targets for this space are still 5 to 10x, not percent, but x
Mm.
efficiency gains. So I think this road is going to be interesting. The journey is going to be interesting. And some of the return on this investment could be fascinating to watch, but it does have to be measurable. Otherwise, there's going to be too many question marks about is this the right application?
And one measure is, of course, security in the federal government. And so, is this a 5x gain? But given the security handcuffs, is that a 3x gain? Is that really going to limit things, or can it be baked in?
I think it can be baked in. I think from the security perspective, it gets to be a little bit more interesting. And this goes back to that concept of speed of threat. As things come in faster and we keep up, is that progress? If things are coming in twice as fast and we're not seeing any more breaches, is that good? Or we're able to tackle vulnerabilities real time and we see some progress. Is that still pretty sizable, right? The ROI shifts from easily quantifiable numbers to a different shifting space. It's like building a sandcastle, but the wind's blowing, and then the sand just keeps rounding over it. Like, am I really making progress here? What's going on? It's kind of hard to see when the sands are shifting that way.
Well, Joel, you went to the Edge conference in December. I was at a conference with a bunch of Air Force folks. And there's a brigadier general there by the name of Genetempo, I think, Brigadier General Genetempo, and oh, he wasn't shy at all. He said, "You know what? We ran some AI and some existing code, and we saw 3,000 lines that were didn't do anything. And by the way, you guys were charging us by the line." And so, but an example of government efficiency by using AI in the software development. I think we may see more and more of those in the future because, as you said, this is not worrying about bad data coming in from generative AI and 1 and 1 is 4 or something. This is just looking at code in almost an abstract and just looking for weaknesses and logic in there. So I think that's what's going to be the real OI is going to be software.
Yeah, and I love that example of, hey, this code's not even doing anything. It's not used,
Yeah.
right? We're seeing the same questions from the cyber side of things of, okay, well, I'm trying to secure my code. This vulnerability is sitting there and it looks problematic. And AI looks at it and says, you're not even calling that code. That's not exploitable. Like that's not even running. So those kind of things really do help us from a use case perspective for prioritizing our time to truly secure applications. And I'm looking forward to seeing more of those use cases emphasized in the new year. Absolutely.
So do you think it's really going back to SBOMs and requirements? Do you think it's going to be now more and more line item and requirements are going to go, by the way, this has to be there? I mean, we see the whole, by the way, AI is affecting the way people write proposals and the way government comes up with, requests for proposals. It's back to, spy versus spy. It's like, so vendors are using AI for proposals and the government's using AI to come. Where's this going to end? It's going to be more and more. It's so difficult to understand anymore.
It is, and I would be lying if I wasn't concerned about it, right? To some extent, when you look at the application of AI, you say, okay, where does it logically stop, and where do we humans step into the process? Like, we're always the system of checks and balances. That part's easy to understand. But if I look at like the application of AI and the overall efficiencies of things, I don't know that the mandates necessarily come down in a harder fashion per se, right? It's, hey, you must do X, Y, and Z. There may be some of that. But I think the way that it comes into existence in the new year may be more around where the efficiencies drive us, right? We keep hearing about, hey, this efficiency in government operations. We're going to focus on efficiency with the new administration. if you truly focus on efficiencies, it's going to also focus you on the processes that you have, the tooling that you have, the automation that you have. It drives you into some of those best practices. And so I I personally feel like as we look at the year ahead, yes, there will be a few things that are mandated, but we may see more adherence to best practices strictly driven by that efficiency mantra. And that could be really interesting to watch to see if it's a consolidation effort, if it's a best practices thing, if it's driven by few or many, if the policies are consolidated, centralized. There's so many questions I have, but I think that may be bigger as a driver than somebody coming out heavy-handed and saying you're going to do it this way.
5, 7 years ago, there used to be these things called word clouds, and people would put them on their blog, and you'd have real popular words. And I don't see that used very much anymore. I usually go to Google Trends and I type in something, but I'm pretty sure that if I went to Google Trends today and typed in government efficiency, we would see it would be a little bit. And I think this is the phrase that pays. It's a word, and people are looking at it more and more carefully. They're saying, well, okay, fine, what's efficient about this? And maybe all these promises made by the people selling shiny new objects. Fine, we love your shiny new objects. Show me the money. Yeah, but yeah, no, show me the money, and then we can talk. And maybe that's the filter. Maybe that's the phrase to evaluate what's going to happen here in the next few months in the federal government.
Yeah, I can't wait for this thing to grow legs, right? Right now, it's just buzzing. It's just buzzing. Everybody's
Yeah.
talking about it. What happens when it starts to actually walk and talk? And so that's going to be really interesting to watch over the months ahead.
I
Absolutely.
don't like to think predicting predictions or political predictions, but I see different technology luminaries talking about efficiency in the federal government. But I think they are approaching it maybe from too much of a West Coast or maybe a commercial environment. When you look at what's going on in the federal government, I think it's much more difficult than people from, let's say, large organizations view it as.
It is a challenging environment. There are so many intricacies. There's so much technical debt, right? So many legacy systems. Just the sheer volume of things, right? When I listen to how many packages come into this country on the average day, it's not a count of per hour or per minute. It's 60 a second or some crazy number like that. Like, okay, how do we keep up with those things, right? That's not something we can just bring simple logic to. These systems are already very advanced. How do we keep up with those kind of things? Or, I don't know how many taxpayers there are in total right now, but the IRS has got its hands full with hundreds of millions of people, right? So how do we make sure that the efficiency gains there are something that are actually scalable? How do we tackle these legacy systems? And we know it's not a simple process because I've watched reports from places like Citibank saying, "Hey, you know what? We're saving a couple $100 million, but it took us 2 years to refactor these 1,200 applications off the mainframe and move us into something new." It's great progress. It's fascinating to listen to. But then you also hear, well, those back end applications are processing like 70 or 80% of all financial applications in the country. I would love for those to stay secure and be consistent and know that when I send out a payment, it gets someplace. So, yes, handle with care. So, those kind of situations, when you think about them, the scale is where it becomes extremely interesting and where the variances start to lie. Oh, and of course, what we can do in the commercial space, we don't necessarily have to ask permission. Not so in the government
Yeah,
space.
yeah. Well, you've met me face to face. I'm not a very big guy, but I know how to scare software developers, get a bunch in a room, and then I talk about refactoring, and then I use the two-word code review. That's the way to make enemies or get people to scared. It's, oh, we went to do the Gilroy guy. Your code review, really? It's almost like, it's almost personal, isn't it? It is personal, Joel.
Well, it's personal to me if you're standing up there threatening me. I'll tell you that,
Yeah,
John.
yeah. No, with code review and refactor this and show efficiencies. It's nice to wave your hand and say that's how we're going to do it. But actually looking at dependencies and hybrid cloud and repatriation, all of a sudden you get in this mix that gets more and more. So maybe the place to start is with SBOMs and just making sure your code's correct before approaching these huge major problems.
There's things that we can do today, immediate steps that we can take that are simpler, right? Things like making sure the SBOM is in play and that we're continuously monitoring that for change. Things like that exist today. That technology is in hand. we're starting to see a lot more exploration of those use cases of, hey, let's do the refactoring thing. Let's try that with AI and see what happens. We'll do it without, and then we'll do it with. And hey, you know what? That's pretty accurate. That looks pretty good. That's what we're starting to hear on most of those use cases. You brought up code review, which is a fascinating place of change because we've done so many of these and it's peer reviews. And all of a sudden, it's not AI saying, well, here's the people who are good at reviews for this particular code. Now AI is getting a foot in the game and saying, hey, here's my thoughts on this code. And you know, what I think is most fascinating is the conversation that should follow is AI saying, here's my opinion on the code. And I get to say back to it, but you wrote that code. You can't get an opinion on this. I'm supposed to give that opinion, right? Or somebody
Yeah.
else writes the code and AI steps in and says, well, here's my opinion on that. And you can now interact with it and challenge it and say, I think that this is okay. And it has to justify its response. This is the new era of code reviews that we're stepping into with AI. So everything's moving forward step by step. And these are technologies, again, they're available today, but we haven't quite gotten to the point where we've adopted them and integrated them and put them where we want them in the process. So fascinating times dead ahead. But in the meantime, yeah, let's grab the low-hanging fruit and run with it and see what we can do.
Joel, you and I both work for big companies. At the end of the year, you sit down with your boss, your supervisor, and get a face-to-face review. You're this good, you're this bad, good. And all of a sudden, this is not personal. It's like, look, Joel, we're going to sit down and we're going to have something review your code. And both you and I are going to look at it and see. It's a better way to manage, a better way to improve than getting all wrapped up in this personality. And we both have the same goal, is to reduce the amount of code and have it fast and quick and safe. And maybe that's the light at the end of the tunnel is that yes, we can use AI to both of us grow together and not be pointing fingers, just saying, well, this is probably a better way to, positive way to end the interview of 2025 with AI. So that's good. Rather than the end of the world is coming, huh?
Yeah, no, not at all. In fact, I think one of the best things that I would look for in that is not just the output saying, hey, you know, we did better this year, but also I made my life better through the use of AI. Like my job was better this year. I took some of that pressure off myself. I was able to do more with less, and I was able to do so without racking my brain and spending those nights on the computer at midnight, you know, trying to get things done because I pivoted, I shifted my workflows into a place where I got more done and my life achieved more balance accordingly. That's what I really want for people,
Yeah.
right? I was one of those guys that spent a lot of nights on a PC, and I'd look up and I was still coding and it's 1 in the morning and how did I get here? And I love that, but I don't love that every day. That's just
Yeah.
too much. And so I think that opportunity for developers and for software people in general to see their improvement to their personal lives is exciting to me. That's something that we can put our finger on and say, you know what? I'll take that. That would be cool.
Yeah. We started the conversation talking about the software development lifecycle, and we're going to end on that and maybe rewrite the software development lifecycle and include, well, now you have some method or technique or approach that can actually take it in general and have that make the next step without having any personal conflicts involved. And we know that happens, but I think this is I never thought we'd be this positive at the end. Mostly it's, oh, this and that. No, but it's a tool that can be used. And I think GitLab can help our listeners find out more. And so where can they learn more if they want to learn more about GitLab?
Well, they can certainly come visit us at the GitLab website where we have a ton of information available. We've actually got a public sector specific web page full of use cases. You can find that right off the main page,
Good.
as well as an AI specific page with some very fun video animations related to what we're doing, where we're going, who we're doing it with, as far as different cloud providers and some of the interactions that we're providing. And all of that is leading us down a very interesting road. If you're listening today, if you're using GitLab, I'll just throw out something called Duo Workflow. Take a look on our website, watch the video. It is fascinating.
Yeah. I will put a link to that in the show notes for this interview. You can take and see what Duo is all about. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Joel Krooswyk. He's the Federal CTO at GitLab. Thanks, Joel.
Thank you for having me on.